An individual's artwork can give their audience a glimpse of who they are and how they see the world. I think this is especially true of Edvard Munch, whose work undoubtedly reflects his worldview and mental state. I chose to research Munch and his artwork because, as someone who's pursuing a master's in psychology, I am particularly fascinated by art as it relates to psychology, as well as how the human mind operates in general. Edvard Munch was born in Adalsbrook, Norway in 1863. He and his family eventually moved to the capital, Christiania, which is now known as Oslo, and this is where Munch grew up. He studied engineering in college and learned about perspective and scale drawings. He eventually dropped out after a year of school to pursue painting full-time. Both physical and psychological illnesses ran rampant in the Munch family. For example, his mother died of tuberculosis shortly after he was born. So then he was raised by his father, who suffered from mental illness, which had an effect on his childhood. For instance, his father raised him and his siblings to live in fear and anxiety based on his own experiences. His sister also died of tuberculosis in 1877, which greatly impacted him, as I'll discuss later. Perhaps as a result of this traumatic upbringing, Munch himself was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. And he states that my father was temperamentally nervous and obsessively religious, to the point of psychoneurosis. From him, I inherited the seeds of madness. The angels of fear, sorrow, and death stood by my side since the day I was born. What's particularly interesting about this statement is that Munch was heavily influenced by Freudian psychology, which I'll go into more depth about later. But one of Freud's theories was that human beings develop their personality by age 5, and he contends that early childhood is the most meaningful time in a person's life, as it dictates who they will become. This is pretty evident in Munch's life. Munch was an expressionist painter whose paintings generally reflected the theme of symbolism. More specifically, he was influenced by 19th century symbolism and 20th century German expressionism. Berlin in particular heavily shaped his identity as an artist. Here he was part of a largely Nordic circle of writers who celebrated the philosophical and psychological aspects of his art. As I mentioned earlier, Sigmund Freud was also a close contemporary of Munch's. Psychology was just starting to break ground as a science thanks to Freud's contributions, and this influenced the culture as a whole. And as we can see, art was not immune to this influence. Not surprisingly, Munch's artwork reflects his personal experience and inner demons. He refers to his art as a soul diary, in which he explores his own psychology and his own feelings. In order to convey the rich meaning behind his works, he cleverly uses distortion, surrealism, and certain colors to provoke certain emotions. The Sick Child, painted in 1866, represents Munch's own mental imagery of his sister dying of tuberculosis. Obviously, this particular moment had a profound psychological impact on him, and he used art as a means of expressing his grief. He actually painted this and repainted this image several times until 1926, and Munch himself describes this painting as having a tremendous impact on his later works. The Red Virginia Creeper, painted in 1898 to 1900, incorporates harsh lines and bold colors to create a disturbing effect. The man also appears to have a greenish skin tone, which could reflect the notion of death or jealousy. The Virginia creeper, or vine, is depicted as entangling the house. This suggests something sinister about the scene, and the man in this painting seems to be fleeing from it. Munch, during this time period, was having an affair with Tulla Larsen, which more than likely influenced the creation of this piece. He was jealous of Tulla's husband, yet feared the commitment of marriage. Some speculate that the house and the vine represent this commitment, and the face of the man reflects Munch's jealousy, which this would just be another example of how Munch's emotional state influenced his paintings. The Scream is probably one of Munch's most well-known pieces. This image is meant to evoke a sense of fear and anxiety from the audience, as it is a portrayal of Munch's own mental state. Some artistic elements of this painting are a lack of realism, as well as a thin, isolated, alien-like figure at the focal point. It's almost as if the scream is what's distorting the scene. The use of bold colors are also meant to communicate intense emotions and Munch's mental turmoil. During the time period in which the Scream was created, Sigmund Freud was particularly influential with his theories of repression and neurosis, and Munch was very much inspired by Freud, as so were several other artists at this time. Paintings like this supposedly give the audience a glimpse into Munch's feelings, both repressed and otherwise. As you've probably already noticed, the painting Anxiety, painted just a year after The Scream, is very similar to it. Both share common artistic elements such as the surrealism and use of bold colors, and the scenery also appears to be the same. What's different about this painting, however, is that anxiety and despair is represented more collectively rather than with an individual person. And it's also said that this painting is meant to depict anxious humanity moving forward as if driven by ominous elemental forces. This is another painting of Munch's that is very somber. Both the painting and its title, Melancholy, represent negative human emotions. The colors in this piece are melancholy in themselves, which was Munch's goal in the creation of this piece. And it is said that an element of this painting is jealousy, as the lonely man sits on the shore while the couple on the dock are supposedly waiting the arrival of a boat. The Sun, painted in 1909, is a modern mural painting and is considered to be a great achievement. It reflects a much more optimistic perspective and represents power and strength. Some interpret the sun as a representation of God. And this painting is an excellent example of Munch's soul diary. And here we get a glimpse of perhaps a much more positive season of his life. It is evident that with this piece that artists are influenced by their current mental state, and their artwork can reflect their overall season of life. I believe that Munch himself provided an excellent summary of this presentation when he stated, "I do not believe in the art which is not the compulsive result of a man's urge to open his heart. Art, as we've learned in class this semester, can be used in a variety of ways, whether it be practically, symbolically, or expressively. It is Munch's belief, as well as my own, that art can be used as an extraordinary outlet for purging one's emotions. It is this cathartic release that yields some of the most noteworthy and respected works. An audience can learn a lot about the artists by admiring their creations, and seasons of life often dictate the overall mood of each piece of art. It goes without saying that the old adage is true, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Here is my bibliography, and thanks for watching, everyone.